is a bit of a look at the digital divide, an age-old topic. But as we're talking about AI today and the related technologies and subsets, machine learning, access to large data sets and so on that are enabling AI, we want to get a sense for how those that are in the lead are likely to maintain their lead, or if there are groups, for example, government is one that comes to mind, that hasn't really adopted AI in a very, very big way. What might be some tools that they can use to at least monitor what's happening and keep abreast of it, if not lead? Maybe I'll start with you, Daniel, since you've looked at the question from a policy perspective, kind of a macro perspective. Can you give us your reading on the question of who are the AI haves and have-nots at the moment?
Sure, yeah. I love it that we send out half the room for this. I'd say they're the have-nots.
Exactly. Obviously, they're missing out on this brilliant discussion.
It's a great panel. So from the policy perspective, I'm really looking at this from the global angle, which is the question of what countries are going to be leading in the adoption and use of AI. The conversation we've been having today is about how AI is this transformational general purpose technology that the main prediction that Avi Goldfarb had earlier today was that this is going to lead to massive increases in productivity. So when we're talking about what will change globally, the question is, you compare all these different industries where you have traded sectors. Is the United States going to be the leader in financial services in the use of AI? Is the United States going to be the leader in agriculture and the use of AI? It doesn't really matter if we're the leaders in AI in barber shops or restaurants, because those aren't the traded sectors of the economy. It does matter in these other ones. So there's this global race to be the leader in AI adoption and use in certain sectors. And then the question is, okay, what factors contribute to that? And so, a big part of that is, of course, this question of, do we have a national digital strategy? But there's also these questions about regulation. And that's where I think, Europe's really getting it wrong with the GDPR. I think a lot of the regulation.
This is the privacy regulation, of course.
Yeah, the data privacy regulation that's going to kind of go into effect in May. It's going to be holding back the use of AI in a lot of sectors. And the question is, what's the US going to do? I think that's kind of the big policy question on the table right now in Washington. And that's why we should be having this conversation, because the conversation is, do we ultimately want to be the leaders? And if so, how are we going to get there?
This raises an interesting question. I mean, we'll get to the corporate dimensions in a little bit, since we have two leading examples on stage of retailers using this AI in a forward-looking way. But since we're on the question of government, the way you talked about AI as though it's a national imperative, an advantage, and to see this as a competition, and where we may fall behind, and you predict Europe will fall behind. It echoes some of the ways that people talk about 5G technology, for example. And we've heard some interesting policy ideas floated from the Trump administration that perhaps 5G, which would be the basis for future competitiveness in the US, should be nationalized, or some sort of information superhighway with a lot more government role, maybe like what South Korea did, for example, in its 4G rollout. And that idea is very new for generally laissez-faire America. We haven't, since the, I think, interstate highway system, we haven't had such an active role in building a national network by the government. I wonder what you think about that, again, as a policyman, and I'll ask for others to comment as well.
Sure.
What is the right role? Is it to go as far as that? With AI, is the analogy doesn't even work with AI because it's so distributed and bottom-up? You couldn't really envision a government role like that? Or
yeah, I mean,
where do you
there's a
fall
lot
out
of
on that?
policies that you can do for supporting digital technologies. And I think the challenges that has been traditionally seen as these two polar sides. On the one side, it's laissez-faire regulation, and it's industry saying hands off, the better option is no regulation. Or the other side where they say, there's these big bad corporations, we need to crack down on them, and we need that kind of regulation. What, if you look at, what some countries do, and what really the model should be, it's, how can the government be a supporting player in this? So can it be a lead adopter of AI, for example, to do some de-risking of the technology, to do proof of concept, to fund research in this area, to encourage and make available data sets that are actually necessary to do AI. There's lots of opportunities like that.
How much of that is America already doing, whether at the federal, state,
Very little.
I mean, there have been open data initiatives and open gov initiatives for a while now.
There's not even a policy in the United States right now that says we want to be global leaders in AI. Even that basic sense of Congress that says we think this is important and we're going to pursue it. That doesn't even exist.
Why does that matter?
It matters because it sets direction to our industry that says this is where you should invest in AI. Because as I said, it's a global competition right now.
It sounds a lot like a Chinese 5-year plan.
Well, the difference is, I mean,
is that how America? I mean, let me ask the business people in the room. Are you taking your cues from government?
You have Canada and the UK. You have Germany. You have Japan. You have South Korea. I mean, it's not just China that's doing this.
Agreed. But I mean, we have two business people, three. No offense intended, of course. Let's get your perspective on the notion of government that's put on the table. Would that be helpful to you if we had some sort of clear vision and a support from the government? How do you see this perspective?
I might take just a half step back to say that I work for eBay and we're a global marketplace, so this notion of a race for AI goodness, I need everyone to win that race. We're in 190 countries, and so cross-border trade is at the heart of the DNA of what makes eBay work. And at the heart of AI is data, as we've heard sort of consistently throughout the day. And so I'd say first and foremost is we want to get to a place where we feel comfortable with consistent access to data as we move across the world and we're conducting cross-border trade, so that if I'm trying to build a personalized shopping experience for a seller who, let's say, sells awesome umbrellas here in San Francisco, or excuse me, here in Chicago, to somebody in Japan, I want to be able to create an experience that as that customer in Japan engages on our marketplace, and we want to build a highly personalized experience that gets to know them and builds a really tailored, delightful future experience, there's a lot of data that changes hands and crosses borders. And I think we need that to build those personalized experiences, and it's very important, as we think of commerce in this global way. The way that we conduct and transact commerce in the future is going to be powered by AI. So it's something we need to be thinking about, more collectively, in my view.
Right. So you took half a step back, but let's see if I can get you to take 2 steps forward. The idea of a national policy rankles you a little bit, since you're a global business. I understand that. The way that you do business now, is government, whether it be data privacy rules or anything else, is it an impediment? Is there something that government should do less of, for example, that would grease the wheels of the commerce you're talking about? Or could you imagine some sort of collaborative approach? For example, Europe, when it came to cellular technology, formed a GSM consortium and leapfrogged ahead of the US, remained a more chaotic, backward state for years and years. There are examples of cross-border cooperation, at least in standards and certain kinds of regulations. What would make sense for you?
I'd answer it sort of this way first, which is the state at which we're activating artificial intelligence in the true sense. Also agreeing with some of the earlier panelists that there's a little bit of misconception about what's AI and what isn't. And we're moving past the stage of using data in a predictive modeling state to actually think and reason. And for that, we're in the very early days where, from my own personal perspective and the perspective of what we're building at eBay, we don't have, the impediments aren't government and policy at the moment. It's still in the science and the technology that we have to engineer and create for our customers. We're way in the early innings. It's not to say that we don't want to pave a path for us, but it's too early for me to say, that a particular policy at this point in time is going to change the trajectory of our investments and our rate of innovation in AI.
How about you, Fiona? You guys are keen on AI at Walmart. I understand you have a Bossa Nova. Is that a kind of a shelf scanning technology that you're using? Can you tell us, just to make it concrete, we've been up in the clouds for a little bit, bring us down to earth on how you're actually using AI and whether you think the framework in terms of policy really makes much difference, or you think a little bit more like eBay does?
Yeah, I think probably a little more like how eBay is thinking about it. Bossa Nova, to be specific, it's a partner that we work with, and it's that shelf-scanning robot. And to that end, and a lot of, again, what Walmart's trying to do is use AI to do things that robots can do well, and then still rely on the humanity of the store associates to be able to do some of the stuff that people.
So does it do stocking or just analysis of what's missing?
So that's the interesting part, right? So it'll go through and it'll tell you which shelves need to be stocked because we've got 5 cans of Campbell's soup left, and we know that at this time of day customers are coming in and we really need to be more at like 12 cans, right? So we can use that, the robot gives us that information, and then essentially what happens then is we automatically, we will dispatch the associate and just say, okay, you just need to go to this aisle, this aisle, this aisle, this is what you need to do, and then be done, right? Whereas in the old...
Is that completely automated, or you still need a stockist to put stuff in place?
So the person goes and puts the stock.
So you just still need the person.
Again,
right.
something that people can do a little bit better than robots. Robots going in there and
they're fumbling around.
Still not so good.
Right.
But then it saves a lot of time, because before, a lot of the time-consuming part of it was actually going and counting, right, for each shelf. And now you don't have to do that. It's just going and pinpointing where the most impactful areas are, and then you go take care of that. And then the rest of the time you can spend on, again, more customer-friendly operations like greeting and helping and all that stuff, right? So that's, one way that we're using AI in a kind of a concrete manner. And then there's a lot that I'm sure eBay and I and Walmart are doing more on your experience, right? The personalized experience, and trying to make sure that we're providing the best customer experience for our customers. And really, it's something that customers expect. So I don't know if any government regulation is going to cause us to slow down. I mean, it's something we have to do. People expect good experiences. We need to work with AI and operational efficiency so we can keep prices low. So these are all things that, as a corporation, we just have to do. We have to push forward.
Right. Now, I mean, it seems like if you have AI-enabled machines doing all of this donkey work, you're going to need fewer people. There's only so many greeters you can have in a store, I imagine. So this must be leading to a smaller workforce in the future.
We haven't really seen that at all. I think we've been doing automation for quite a while, and what we found is, again, I think when you go to a store, even now, you can't ever, you don't still feel like you have the associate there when you need them. And we're hoping that with some of this stuff, we will actually be able to provide, kind of service when customers need it. So at this point, we're still feeling pretty bullish in terms of being able to leverage humans for what they're really good at, and then just taking away some of the tediousness of their jobs, and maybe different jobs will be available, and we can focus more on the customer experience, which I think that's where we want to step up.
Right. Okay. I mean, I know that's the great promise, right? We hope it works out that way, but I have my doubts. When AI replaces me in writing articles, I'll have to call up our readers and say, I'm here to make you feel better. Can I explain that story to you? I'm not quite sure what I'll end up doing, but maybe retail is different. Billy, you've been very patient here. Thank you for joining us and supporting us. What do you think about this question? We've talked about the role of government and whether this is really a bottom-up process or top-down. As someone in the tech sector, what do you think about this?
Yeah, we sit in a very interesting intersection of almost all the conversations that we had today. We're a Silicon Valley-based company, a lot of talk about that. We were built on an open source technology that we drove called Apache Cassandra, which has been adopted by most of the companies that are disrupting traditional industries. And it's essentially a distributed database that functions very well in a hybrid cloud world. So we have the responsibility of being the place where all this data that's been talked about all day actually lives. And our customers are typically enterprise customers. They're almost always multinational. So they're dealing with regulations, not just in their home countries, but in every country in which they do business. So we also have employees in over 30 countries ourselves. So we have to deal with it on all fronts. We're dealing with it helping our customers. We're dealing with it as a company ourselves. And what we find when it comes to the specific question of regulation is that it becomes very imbalanced very quickly when you're a multinational. And I think the examples that you've heard today about trying to figure out the European regulations versus the Chinese regulations versus the US regulations, that really can become an inhibitor to a lot of innovation. And so we prefer the responsibility to be held by the private companies. Now, that said, I think we have a long way to go in increasing the transparency to our end users on all fronts. As an example, we have privacy policies. We manage some of our customers' data in the cloud. That introduces a whole nother level of accountability. We have a third-party firm that we pay a pretty good amount of money to come in and make sure we're doing what we say we're going to do with our privacy policies so that we can tell our customers we're taking an extra step. But if you try and layer in government regulation on top of that, you're going to get very quickly mismatched levels of competition, which I don't think is good for innovation, and that will lead to a lot of have-nots who are going to be overburdened.
Mismatched levels of competition. Can you explain what that means?
So if one particular region of the world has complete freedom to collect various amounts of data, given permission by their end users to do so, then based on all the discussions you've heard today, you probably have a good idea by this point that the data in matters significantly in the quality of your intelligence out. So if you don't have the right data, you're not going to get the right intelligence. And the more data, the better the intelligence. So if you disadvantage one region by putting so many regulations on them that they spend more time trying to adhere to the regulations than they do collecting, analyzing, and using the data, then you're going to disadvantage them. And this is also a battle. The other thing that really struck me today in very illustrious group of panelists that you've had is the notion of real time. Almost all the discussions today were about right now impact on these AI decisions. If you start regulating that too much, even, you heard one of your panelists say, even days, the data's too old. So if you're worried about the regulations, I don't think you're going to be able to innovate as fast as you need to. But that said, I do think we need greater levels of accountability, responsibility, and transparency, but it needs to happen more in the free markets. And companies need to be held accountable for that, and they need to demonstrate trust to their consumers at the end of the day.
So Daniel, you've heard from 3 industry folks. They have some concerns about what the role of government should be. How do you respond to them? And what's something that's compatible with how American business works and how technology evolution happens that you think would work that we're not doing yet? Like what would be a particular proposal you'd put on the table as you think about this a lot?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the most important questions that are out there is, we have to separate when we're talking about AI that's, automating processes that are purely industrial and those that are touching individuals. There's a lot of concern right now about, how are we going to regulate algorithmic decisions about individuals, whether it's, whether you get a bank loan, whether you're hired for a job, your probation or sentencing in criminal justice, right? There's a lot of concerns there. And so that is an area where there's a number of proposals that are on the table for industry-wide regulation, similar to what is being proposed and has been implemented, is being implemented in Europe. And that's where I think we should be concerned. And that's where I think we need something that's uniquely American, where we don't want to say, let's just have transparency, which is the European proposal that's on the table right now.
This is algorithmic transparency.
Algorithmic transparency, which it's still not clearly defined, even though it's going into effect in a couple of weeks.
Right.
But the idea is that, a company will have to say, this is how I'm making this decision. Maybe at some point they'll be required to reveal source code or specifics of a model. Mm-hmm. Maybe they'll be required to reveal what data is going in into a particular decision. And we're saying instead you need algorithmic accountability. That is, you need to know if there's something, if the outcomes match your intentions, and if you're able to have proper oversight and mitigation if things go wrong.
Now,
I think that's what we care about.
How are you going to do this? I mean, these are often trade secrets. They're closely guarded, the algorithms of companies. They're not going to give it up easily. And secondly, who would do it? Would you put a company at a competitive disadvantage just by having an audit by the government or some other body? Surely would handicap that company versus its competitors.
Right, and so I think what the US did right on data protection rules in the past, very different than what Europe did, was instead of having comprehensive rules, they said we're going to have sector-specific rules. So we have health data privacy rules. Right. We don't have general data privacy rules. So I think the same thing will be true with AI, where we say, when we're talking about autonomous vehicles, maybe there's a different standard there than when we're talking about, who gets an ad from eBay, and being able to separate that out and then giving, some government, allowing industry self-regulation. That's the way to, I think, kind of find a blend between addressing some of the concerns that are out there and still allowing businesses to continue to innovate and be at the leading edge.
Right. Okay. No, that makes sense. And there's a related topic of data poverty that you've touched on in some of your writings. Is there a hidden societal bias in data? Is it possible that, general worry is that there's too much data collected on all of us, but should we be more worried about not enough data collected on some people? Can you talk a little bit about what that means and what the concern is?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, the idea is that in some areas of the country, you might be born in a hospital where, immediately just enormous amounts of data are collected, they're fed into an electronic health record, or you're going to a school where they have great databases, they're tracking your personalized learning, interactions with software. They know exactly how you learn, and these give you significant advantages later in life, and especially as we have more and more AI and more opportunities to use this data. But there's going to be a number of people who don't have this data collected about them. And this will be a problem that's very personal, and it'll be regional, it'll be global, it'll cross different socioeconomic lines, and it's something we should be thinking about now. Already we're seeing the impact in healthcare, where if you're a Hispanic female, you're less likely to have medical research trials have data about you personally. If you're of certain ethnicities, you're less likely to have data collected about you. And so there's a real concern that if we don't address this problem of, at the personal level, data haves and data have-nots,
right,
there are going to be people that are left out from the advantages of all this innovation. And the answer isn't, let's stop the innovation. The answer is, how do we bring everyone along? Just like we've had plans for addressing the digital divide and the broadband divide, we should be thinking about the data divide. And how do we actually ensure that people have important data collected about them so that they can benefit from many of these types of innovations?
Well, people just need to buy more stuff on eBay and at Walmart.
There you go.
Right. They'll be getting endless amounts of data harvested about their activities, right? More seriously, though, clearly it's possible that what happens with AI will mirror existing inequities in society, right? As with all new technologies, often elites have access to them. But is there any opportunity for leapfrogging? I want to give an example. For example, in India, which has a tremendous inequality, obviously much more so than the US, you have a new national identity system called Aadhaar, which has, basically it's ubiquitous at this point, government-sponsored central database. Many of you will know about it. But the point I wanted to make was, it has, and they routed what used to be a relatively inefficient and often corrupt system of subsidies and welfare payments through this system, which is digital biometrics, much less likely to be manipulated. But the government now has lots of data, and this data set on where people are, what they're getting, what their means are, and so on. So you suddenly have people who might have had no data on them at all, suddenly leaping ahead to a baseline of a reasonable amount of data. I wonder, is there an opportunity like that in the US that you can see, or any of you can see, where there may be leapfrogging opportunities, not simply, again, a pattern of the past being repeated with new technologies?
I can throw out one example. I think we're talking about smart cities. This is an opportunity to do things on an equitable basis, at least geographically. And I think that's something that we have to start thinking about now, which is can we collect data that's representative? And I'll give you a very specific example of this. If you look at crime data, we just did a great interview with the CEO of ShotSpotter. It's a company that they basically have these microphones all around the city. They hear shots go off, and they can see where crime is happening. We talk about gun violence in America, but we see when there's a shooting in a school. That's on the news. In many urban areas, there's lots of gunshots that go off, and they're not reported.
Right.
And so it feeds the cycle of the community not thinking the police care about them, but also the police not knowing about it. So by collecting this data, you're actually able to get a much more responsive system. But you have to think about it comprehensively. To see how this doesn't work, a few years ago, there was a maid discovered in the White House, this bullet fragment, in the White House, right? And they said, how did this happen? And they went back and tracked it. What's interesting is DC's had ShotSpotter technology for many years, but they never thought to put it around the White House area because they said, oh, there's no crime there, right? But it turns out if they would have had it, they would have seen this gunshot before anyone else.
What's the speculation? Was it
someone aimed a gun at the White House.
aimed a gun at the White House? Is that it? Yeah. It's not from the War of 1812 or something like that.
Yeah, it was a recent.
Okay, or Hillary waving a gun at Bill during his misbehavior. Who knows?
On that point, I think that for better or worse, in the U.S., because that's what you asked about, right, specifically, we have self-elected, at least at the moment, to give a very high preponderance of our data to a few private companies. I've chosen to give a lot of my data even to Walmart. I've chosen to give it to eBay.
You mean you at a personal level?
Me at a personal level, right? So I
Not
think
your company.
Correct. Yes, that's good. Me personally. So. And as a society, I think we've done the same thing. We've chosen to give to become somewhat of a data oligarchy in some ways. And we talked about the better information you have. So what are the questions for our society around that? We all have, even the underclass, tend to have mobile technology. In that mobile technology, they're often giving information on a regular basis to one of these companies, whether it be for the tracking of a map or whatever. And so maybe there's a way as a country we find out how to take that type of data and then also use it for good. I don't know if it's sharing the data sets or sharing a portion of the data sets, but we already are collecting a mass amount of information, I would argue, across the socioeconomic spectrum, but it's happening in private companies, not necessarily at the government level.
That's right. I mean, where are the business models in the social sector, for example? I could easily imagine if people had an option. As you say, we yield our data to well-known and trusted retailers and so on, because we get something in return. The technology companies, there's something that we want to search, you give your data to Google. But if it were possible to donate the data or the value of the data to a social enterprise that's doing something in the public good, maybe a smart city project, people taking buses, subways, Lyfts, Ubers, et cetera, or their own cars, if they could just press a button to say, I will donate this data, which would help the city make more efficient planning of public transport, for example. But there's no button like that. There's no blue button you press and say, I'll share this. It's like organ donation, right? I'll donate my data. I could imagine something like that being of some service, but there's no money in it at the moment, right? So we have to think about some creative ways of getting to something like that. On the notion of charitable uses of data and AI, I wanted to come to you, Fiona, because I think there was an example of Walmart in the wake of Hurricane Harvey, playing a very important early role. Can you tell us a little bit, remind us, those of us who didn't follow it that closely, what your firm was able to do, both with your hard assets like your logistics and so on, but also what role maybe data, AI, and predictive kind of analytics played?
Absolutely. So I think this is where, again, obviously Walmart has a lot of data already on our own in terms of how we replenish and restock and forecast. But then when you have something like a natural disaster that we know is coming, it's also using data from the weather forecast and then kind of predicting what that's going to look like and making sure that we get the goods that we need to those stores and to those areas to make sure that we're going to account for that. So we use a lot of the machine learning and predictions around what we think is going to be needed, and then be able to bring that to bear. And then again, back to the humanity part, there's definitely that getting the goods to the store so that they can serve the customers. And then the other part is just the fact that the associates are there right after the hurricane, opening up the store so that they can serve the customers. So again, back to the humanity, it's
Right.
a lot of the tech to make sure that we're well prepared for it, but then we still have to go back to, depending on our associates to be there who are gonna make that trip. It's still probably pouring out, it's still bad conditions. They're gonna get to the store, open it up, clean it up so people can get their fresh water and their food and supplies, so.
How far can we extend that example? If we look to the future, do we see that there are going to be, the topic of our panel is AI haves and have-nots, that leading companies are going to be AI haves, and oftentimes the regions or countries in which you operate may not be as advanced in that same thing. What's a model we can think about where, like with the disaster relief example, but on a more ongoing basis, where companies can play a positive role in sharing some of their knowledge? Are there examples you guys are aware of or that you can envision being participating in?
Well, certainly one thing that I think is unique about eBay, we're not a first-party retailer. We're a platform. We're a two-sided marketplace. So, from our humble beginnings, it has always been about community and empowerment. And so as our platform continues to evolve, and we have 170 million buyers on the platform and 30 million sellers, there's a lot of people out there in the world that would all benefit from future growth of economic prosperity. And we're a platform and a flywheel for that. And the way we think about it is we're applying technology to create a more efficient market, to create the ability for anyone to come on the platform and participate in creating a business, whether you're a single individual, an entrepreneur, a small business owner, or a large enterprise. And we give everybody an equal playing field, if you will, to access this global customer base. And we're using the technology and we're using artificial intelligence to create a more efficient market for virtually anything that anyone has to sell in the world. There's likely a buyer for it. We call it latent supply and latent demand. And we use our technology to connect these bits together. So when I think about the role that this technology can play globally in giving everybody a shot at this, when you plug in, for example, and become a seller on the eBay platform, you're afforded all of the benefits of our AI capabilities. And you're even afforded some data and an API that allows you to build on top of it in your own way that suits your business. But you get the benefits of that the same way that a large enterprise does that's doing business with us. And that's just proven to be a phenomenal flywheel that scales small and large. And I think that's an important responsibility that we all share. But I think what's similar to eBay and the philosophy of Google as well is by turning this into an accessible platform, you help propagate the technology to the have-nots. And more than just throwing some technology or data over the fence and saying, this is AI, go knock yourself out, have some fun. We actually put it in the context and framework of doing business and generating economic prosperity so that it's fairly turnkey.
Is there a prospect of expanding what you're doing to a broader industry collaboration? How do you see it? Retailers are notoriously cutthroat competitors, but with something like AI, which is an enabling technology, what's the role for pre-competitive collaboration?
Well, it's another way to, I think there's a big opportunity just to answer the question directly. And that's evidenced by just looking at some of the nature of the folks who are selling on our platform, including retailers like Best Buy, and many more, because we've created this kind of global community that's very tightly wired into a dynamic and live marketplace of 1.2 billion items that are for sale at any given time. That's super interesting, not only for the buyers, but it's also really interesting for merchants and retailers at large, because it's a system that is continuing to learn and improve and get smarter as a broader global commerce experience that people would like to be part of. And so I also believe that there's this notion of our capacity now to catalog things goes beyond commerce, but I envision a day where we're able to take inventory of all the world's stuff, literally everything that exists in the world. We should know what that stuff is and be able to describe it. That becomes the penultimate data set from which all sorts of wonderful applications, commerce and beyond could be created. And I wouldn't say we're close to having a catalog of all the world's stuff, but
I mean, I don't even know what's in my basement. How are you going to catalog everything that's in the world? It's
right.
crazy.
Well, but if you think about what's at the core, I'll just say one thing about how we think about AI at eBay. It's not just a recommendation engine of sorts. To really do this right, you have to have understanding of things in the world. So we talk about shop knowledge and world knowledge. So you need to understand and have some systematic context of the world around you in AI, as well as having some context around the items that you have in your store or in your catalog, if you're really going to provide a meaningful experience the way humans do in a retail store, giving you a great set of recommendations, for going on a hiking trip, for example, if you're at an REI store. And that exists in humans. It's the culmination of their life experiences and their work experience at the place they work. And what we need to be doing is replicating that or creating that kind of capability with systems at scale.
Right.
But Vijay, you actually said something pretty profound in your joke about you don't know what's in your basement. I can tell you from the data set that I have working with enterprises and governments from around the world, there are still so many fundamental practical things that are stopping companies from leveraging AI. So if you took brilliant minds like RJ and Fiona who have done this for their companies and dropped them into an organization that psychologically wasn't ready yet to make the adoption of new technologies that are required to handle this kind of data, and they have old organizational structures and they have old bureaucracies, these two would not be able to help one bit. And I see this all the time where companies are in conflict with themselves because they haven't got their own data house in order yet, even the data they have, and then you're trying to come in and tell them these things that that feel just out of reach. And so often what we do as a first step with customers is just help them first understand what is in your basement so that you know where to start, you know where to begin. Because I think that you could, as I said, you guys may disagree, but I think you can't take the brilliant concept if you don't have the fundamentals, and much of our work is helping them get the fundamentals so that they can dream big. But if you don't have that, the dreams will fail, I think.
Absolutely. I think certainly the digital transformation that the companies have to go through, they have to be data-driven. And then beyond that, it's also, you actually have to change the way you do things.
Yep.
The processes that you have, you can't just plug in AI and think everything's going to be the same. Actually, the way you do things have to fundamentally change. And to your point, some of the jobs will change, right? So instead of, say, for example, if we plug in pricing as an example, the merchant that maybe have been doing that before, now they would use the data and the pricing models will come up with something and they can do something else. But like I said, the processes and the jobs may have to change as well, and you have to be able to do that, right? So you have to have the data, you have to have the digital transformation, and then you have to really relook at your processes to take
So let me press you on that, Fiona, since you're being so open, which we really appreciate. If Billy's point is taken on board that sometimes companies need to take stock of what they have before they can take the leap.
Yeah.
In your own journey over at Walmart, what changed? What had to change? And can you talk a little bit about if there was a challenge, or how did you get there?
Yeah, no, I think it certainly is, and I would say, we're still on a journey. As the world's largest company, we do have a lot of data, but to your point, it's still, even for us, right, making sure that we have all the data, it's all collected, we're all working through one data set, so you don't have people working off of chunks of data that may not be, regulated across the company. So it's certainly bringing the data in and then making sense of it, right? So, we know a lot about the online data, for example, but we have a much, much bigger data set of customers that shop in our stores.
Right.
So it's for us, how do we bring that in? We have that data, we can use it in aggregate, but how do we learn how to actually get it to a more personal level? So there's a lot of work that we're doing now in terms of matching and classifying the data and being able to figure that out. So using a platform that we've just recently built, being able to try to get to a more personalized information for even the stuff that's being bought in the store. Because that's where we can really bring value again to our customers, right? It's, I know you bought this at the store, I know you bought this online, how can I help give you this really seamless shopping experience? So it's
That's the holy grail of retail now, right?
Yes.
Online, O2O, or whatever euphemism one wants to use. Because recognizing that individuals are complex,
Right.
sometimes they want to go and browse,
Sometimes they want to go to a store, sometimes they
have
want
it
to shop
delivered,
online,
et cetera.
Sometimes they want to use your voice.
Sure.
I think we've got to just be able
And
to.
their expectations are changing.
Exactly.
And the digital sophistication is changing as
Correct.
well. So you actually have a moving target in trying to understand.
Absolutely.
So yeah, good luck with that one.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Let me see, we just have a couple of minutes left. Anybody have a question for our gurus? I see a gentleman there. Let's get a microphone. As always, please identify yourself and make it a question, not a long-winded statement.
Okay. Brent Leland, Advancing AI Wisconsin. We're talking about the haves and have-nots. I'm curious about sort of the will and the will-nots. So, what's been your experience with both consumers and employees in their either resistance or comfort with dealing with bots? And, kind of where does that go? Both physical bots and virtual bots, maybe managing them, making decisions for them. I'm just curious what you find with that.
Who wants to take this one? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm happy to start. It's been a fascinating journey for us. We launched something called eBay ShopBot almost 2 years ago. So that's a long time in bot evolution, if you will. And it was important for us to do this for a couple of reasons. First was, we know that the consumption models of consumers are changing dramatically with the rise of the sharing economy. And we also know that where people are spending their time online is also fundamentally changing. And one area that was getting the disproportionate amount of traffic, attention, and eyeballs per hour is messaging platforms. Whether it's Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp, even Instagram, you could call it in a way a visual messaging platform in a way, rule the roost. And so the future of our business and commerce is about going to where the customers are spending their time. And so if we were going to show up inside of a messaging experience, you couldn't exactly just put a lemonade stand and just start selling something in a chat window. We knew that we'd have to fit the form and meet the medium and the users in the context that they were comfortable. And very long story short, it was unexpected. I think as consumers, we're starting to engage with our bot, which is completely AI-based, driven by an advanced natural language understanding engine and what we call a knowledge graph. Our bot has deep knowledge of our billion items in the catalog. So we could also actually hold a conversation with you. It can actually hold 2 conversations with you and switch topics if you change your mind and you're shopping for sunglasses and you decide you want a hat and then you want to come back to the sunglasses. These things are really hard to model and build in software in AI. But boy, are we getting a lot closer now to getting to a natural, human-like type of conversation and actually making really great recommendations. But the curve is sort of long and slow, but we are seeing the hook begin in all transparency, where people would love to have that personalized kind of shopping experience at scale, but interestingly enough, without having to talk to a person or pick up the phone and get into a long-winded setup to create the context to get the answers they want. They want to kind of do it on their own terms, which is a new experience that sits between the physical retail experience and then the online just searching and browsing things on a website. But it's massively powerful because you can do this with 1 million shoppers at the same time, which is hard to do in the physical world.
Can you go as far as to predict what I want and then proactively ship it to my house?
Yes.
You think that's going to work?
Absolutely.
We heard earlier today about a patent that Amazon has in this area. It seems a little presumptuous of them to think they know what I want, but it sounds like you're on board with them. How about you, Fiona?
no,
Do you guys think you can predict?
I think so. I think, again,
Not in order to keep stock, but in order to actually consummate the purchase and send it to my house, or in some way go beyond what's being done today. You think so too?
I think so too, especially for necessities. Yes, and then it's, like I said, it's back to the convenience, right? And I think that's where you'll be happy with it because you didn't have to worry about stocking your toilet paper, right? So those are things that I think and consumers will be, I think more receptive to.
Okay, so predictive shopping, it's a real thing. We have 3 proof points today. I'm not so sure about that, whether I'll be a welcome and happy recipient of packages offering me things. I like to have the illusion of autonomy and agency, so I would probably not be a good customer for that.